Mr. President, earlier this year, I came to the floor with a group of Republican and Democratic senators to congratulate the Majority Leader, Senator Reid, and the Republican Leader, Senator McConnell, as well as the leaders of the Appropriations Committee, Senators Inouye and Senator Cochran. And the reason for that congratulations was this. They had said that they were going to do their best to bring all of the appropriations bills to the floor and pass them. Now, that may not seem like such a monumental pledge or promise, but it in fact is, because only twice since the year 2000 has the United States Senate ever gone through the whole process of bringing all 12 appropriations bills to the Senate floor and enacting them in time for the beginning of the fiscal year, October 1. Why is that so important? Well, we're in the midst of a fiscal crisis. We're borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar we spend. One way to deal with that is through the appropriations process. That's our first constitutional responsibility. Judges judge, we appropriate. That's the first thing we do. We have control of the people's money. And the appropriations bills I'm talking about, the 12 of them, together constitute a pretty big number. More than a third, 36 to 37% of all the dollars we spend in the federal government go through those 13 bills. Used to be a lot more, but so it's about $1 trillion, not chump change. So when the Majority Leader and the Republican Leader said, yes, we're going to do our best to bring all those appropriations bills to the floor, I thought the Senate had taken an important step in functioning the way the American people expect the United States Senate to function. And that is to get about the serious business of this country. So as in the words of the Australian Foreign Minister, we can show the people we recognize that we're really one budget agreement away from reasserting America's preeminence in the world. From reasserting America's preeminence in the world. We have that within our power. The economy of the country, the economy of other countries, depends to a great extent upon our ability to govern ourselves properly. So I was very encouraged when the Majority Leader and the Republican Leader said, yes, we're going to do our best to bring all 12 of those bills to the floor. So, Mr. President, I regret to say I'm equally disappointed that the Majority Leader has suddenly announced last week that he won't bring any appropriations bills to the floor. And the reasons he gives are very puzzling to me. First, he says, well, the House is using a different number than the Senate. Well, Mr. President, what is so new about that? That's why we have House and the Senate. They're one kind of body, we're another kind. They have their opinion, we have ours. And we vote on our opinions, and then we have a procedure called the conference, in which we come together and we get a result. Now, we've had so few conferences lately that maybe some people have forgotten we do that. But we have a way to do it. And then the Majority Leader said, well, they in the House violated the Budget Control Act. Mr. President, the Budget Control Act was something we agreed on. I voted for. I voted for to try to put some limits on the growth of the appropriations process of the budget. And if we stick to that over the next 10 years, the discretionary spending, not the 2/3 of the budget that's entitlement, but this 1/3 we're talking about, will only grow at the rate of about inflation, plus a little bit more. If our whole budget grew at that rate, we wouldn't have a fiscal problem. So those aren't good reasons. We have a way to reconcile our differences. The Budget Control Act was only limits. The Senate actually has exceeded those limits, according to my colleague, Senator Corper, already 3 times this year. So there is no excuse whatsoever, Mr. President, for not bringing up appropriations bills on the floor of the Senate. If you think the Solyndra loan was a bad idea, that's the place to take it out. Or if you want to spend more money for national defense, that's the place to put it in. Or if you think we're wasting money in national parks or too much government land, that's the place to take it out. Are those bills ready to come to the floor? Yes, they are, Mr. President. In the Senate, we've been doing our job in our committee. I want to be exactly right about this, but I believe we have 7 of our bills. Well, actually, we have 7 appropriations bills that are ready to come to the floor, ready to go to work right now. And the House of Representatives has already passed 11 of the 12 through committee, and 6 of those are ready to come to the floor. So this month, we could be debating any of those appropriations bills. We could have amendment after amendment after amendment. We could reduce our spending. We could increase our spending. We can say to the American people, we're doing our job. Which brings me to my second disappointment, Mr. President. I was greatly encouraged this year, and a lot of the credit goes to senators on the Democratic side as well as some on our side who are saying, wait a minute, we're grown-ups. We recognize that we're political accidents. We've been given the great privilege of representing the people of our state and swearing an oath to our Constitution of the United States so that we can help lead this country. And so we'd like to go to work. We'd like to go to work. And what does the Senate do? Well, the Senate brings bills up through committee. It puts bills on the floor. And then, as the late Senator Byrd used to say, almost any amendment comes to the floor, and we debate it, and we vote on it, and then we either pass the bill or we don't pass the bill. That's what the Senate does. And we on our side have been saying to the Majority Leader, Mr. Majority Leader, let us offer our amendments. Don't silence the voices of the people in our states that we represent. And he has been allowing that more to happen. Of course, he has the procedural ability to stop that. And the senator from Michigan said, let's try just having relevant amendments. And so we said, okay, let's just try that. And so we began to make some progress. There was a dispute over district judges. We resolved that, and we've been confirming them. The Postal Service bill, the Farm bill, the FDA bill, the Highway bill. These are all important pieces of legislation that affect almost every American family. And what did we do? They went through committee. They had the expertise of the members who work on those committees. They came to the floor. We had a lot of amendments. We voted on them, and they were passed by the United States Senate. In other words, we did what we should do. I thought we were on a lot better track until the last 2 or 3 weeks. And suddenly what's happened? Suddenly all that ends. And we revert to political exercises, little bills of no real importance compared to the bills we should be debating, a jobs bill, a Disclose Act bill, loans, the bill we're about to go to that the other senator from Michigan is proposing. The problem with those bills is they have not been through committee. They're not going to pass the House. Everybody knows that. So we're wasting our time at a time, Mr. President, we could be debating all of the appropriations bills of the United States government at a time when the United States government is borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar we spend. We're not even going to do our job and consider those bills on the floor and amend them. What will the whole world think? What will our constituents think about our ability to govern ourselves if we can't pass, even consider an appropriations bill in the United States Senate? On top of that, we haven't had a budget for over 1,000 days. I remember when Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, came back and met with a group of senators. She came back from Iraq early after their government was formed. She said, they can't even get a budget over there in Iraq. And the senators looked around at each other, and here, we've been a republic for a long time, and we can't get one either. So I'm very disappointed by the fact that after a promising surge of activity that was bipartisan and that got results, we've suddenly reverted back to forgetting that we have a way to deal with business. And it's not because we don't have anything to do. Where's the cybersecurity bill? Where's the defense authorization bill? Where are the appropriations bills, Mr. President? They're all ready to be considered at a time when we are in a fiscal crisis, looking at a fiscal cliff, which if we don't solve, according to the Congressional Budget Office and the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board yesterday, will plunge us into a recession in the first 6 months of 2013. Those are the stakes we're playing with. And then there's a third area in which I must express my severe disappointment. We worked hard at the beginning of this Congress to accommodate a number of senators who felt we needed changes in the rules, and we made some changes. But we preserved the Senate's integrity as a different sort of institution, as a place where 51 votes, the party that has 51 votes doesn't run over anybody else. Alexis de Tocqueville said that the two greatest problems he foresaw with the American democracy, this was back in the 1830s, were one, Russia, and two, the tyranny of the majority. Well, in the Senate, the United States Senate, as Senator Byrd used to so eloquently say, is the single most important institution in our country to protect minority rights and minority points of view. Sometimes we're in the minority on this side, and you'll notice there are some fewer deaths. And then after election, maybe more people vote for Democrats, and they come in and they pick up the deaths and they move them over to that side. And whichever side is in the minority in the Senate still has rights. And those aren't just the rights of the senators themselves, they're their rights to speak the voices of the people of Tennessee or Maryland or Nevada or New York or Kentucky. It's those voices that need to be heard on the floor of the United States Senate. And when we can't debate, when we can't offer amendments, and we can't vote, those voices are silenced. Those voices are silenced. So to my great surprise, the majority leader who had done, and as I said, I came to the floor more than once to compliment him for this, said at the beginning of this Congress that he wouldn't seek to change the rules of the Senate except according to the regular order, except according to the rules of the Senate, which say you've got to have 67 votes. That's what the rules say. And we agreed on that. And what that really meant was we needed a change in behavior, not a change in the rules, to show that the Senate could function. Now, last night on television, apparently, the majority leader said that in the next Congress, he had changed his mind, that if he's the majority leader, that he will seek to change the rules of the Senate by 51 votes. Mr. President, that will destroy the United States Senate. That will make it no different than the House. And I would say to my friends on the other side, if they want to make the Senate like the House, where a freight train can run through it with 51 votes, they might not like it so well when the freight train's the Tea Party Express, which it could be. Republicans could be in control of the United States Senate after this session. Republicans could have a president. And then where would Obamacare be? Where would a whole series of things be? There'll be a great many senators on the other side who say, wait a minute, let's slow down the train. Let's think about what we're doing. That was the original intention of the founders of this country. The House is majoritarian, 51 votes control. A freight train can run through it day in and day out. But when it gets to the Senate, we stop and think, and minority rights are protected. And as a result of that, usually that forces us to have a supermajority, 60, 65, or 70 votes in order to do anything big, such as the time when finally the Civil Rights Bill was enacted in the 1960s, and Senator Russell, who'd led the debate against the Civil Rights Act, he'd filibustered it, he was finally defeated, he flew home to Georgia and said, it's now the law of the land, we support it. That is why President Johnson wrote the bill in the office of the Republican leader, even though the president was a Democrat. He wanted bipartisan support. He knew that in the United States Senate, I thank the president, I ask consent for 5 more minutes.
Without objection, the senator is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. President Johnson knew that he had the votes in the 1960s to pass the Civil Rights Act without Republican support. But he had the bill written in the office of Senator Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader. I remember I was a young aide at that time. And the senators were in there and the aides were in there, and pretty soon everyone was invested in it. When it passed, as I said, Senator Russell went home to Georgia and said, it's the law of the land, we have to support it. Now we're coming up on what the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board has called the fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff. This is a convergence of big issues, ranging from the debt ceiling to how we pay doctors, to the spiraling out of control entitlements we have, to a need for a simplified tax code, to a need for lower rates. We've been working on this in various ways, across party lines, for several months. There's a growing consensus that the time to act is after the election. It will require presidential leadership, whether it's a newly inaugurated President Obama or a new President Romney. And our job, Mr. President, will see that the newly inaugurated president succeeds, whether he is a Republican president or a Democratic president, because if he does, then our country succeeds. And what are the stakes? The Foreign Minister of Australia put it very well, Bob Carr, when he said in a speech here, and he's a great friend of the United States, I've known him for 25 years, he said the United States is one budget agreement away from reasserting its global preeminence. One budget deal away from reasserting our global preeminence. But Mr. President, if we can't even bring up an appropriations bill to debate it and to amend it and to vote on it and to pass it, if we suddenly are dealing with bills that haven't gone to committee that are nothing more than a political exercise, if we're sitting around in the United States Senate with nothing to do, really, of significance here, and there's only one person who can bring up issues here, and that's the majority leader, how is that going to convey to the American people that we're capable of governing ourselves? I think it sends a clear message that we are failing to do that. So having expressed my disappointment, I want to express my respect for the majority leader and to say again how much I appreciated the efforts that he made at the beginning of the Congress to say that we wouldn't change the rules of this institution except according to the rules. And the effort that he said he would make at the beginning of this year to bring up the appropriations bills, and the efforts that he has made to allow more amendments on a whole series of bills this year and say, can we not go back to that, even though this is a presidential election year? The stakes are too high. And as far as voting on amendments, that's why we're here. I mean, why would you join the Grand Ole Opry if you didn't want to sing? That's why we're here. We're here to express the views of ourselves and of the people we represent, to make sure their voices heard, and then we're here to get results. So I hope my record is a pretty good record of working to get results. I sometimes say to my friends, they will say, well, you're being bipartisan. I'm not interested in being bipartisan. I'm interested in results. And I learned in the public schools of Maryville, Tennessee, how to count. And I know that it takes 60 votes to get results. So anything important we do is going to require Democrats and Republicans. We're going to need a coalition of Democrats and Republicans, not 51 or 53, 54, no matter who's in charge next year. We're going to need a coalition of 60 or 65 or 70 that will come around some of the most difficult issues we've had to face in terms of tax reform, in terms of budget reduction, in terms of reining in entitlements, a whole series of issues. We're going to have to remember our pledge to the Constitution that we take at the beginning of each 6-year term, and we're going to have to honor that pledge. So that's the United States Senate that I hope to see. That's the United States Senate that I'm working to create. I want to create an environment in which the Democratic leader and the Republican leader can succeed on big issues in helping us put together results on the serious problems. I want to make the Australian foreign minister the great friend of the United States. I want to show him that we can answer his question and that we realize, just like he does, that we're one budget agreement away from reasserting America's global preeminence, and that we in the United States Senate are perfectly capable of doing it. And by not bringing up appropriations bills, by reverting to political exercises, by leaving off the table many amendments that need debate, and by even suggesting that we would change the nature of the United States Senate so a freight train could run through it with 51 votes, none of that encourages confidence in the ability of the United States to govern that I think exists. I know my colleagues pretty well. I work hard with people on both sides. I respect them all and their opinions, and I don't question their motives. And it is my personal judgment that 85% of us on both sides of the aisle want a result on the big fiscal issues and on every other big issue that comes here. And I'd like to do my best to create an environment in which that could happen. I thank the President. I yield the floor.